His teacher never called him until one day she decided to humiliate him in front of everyone. But when he started with that game, the teacher's face said it all. She never thought that such a surprise would happen to her. The morning sunlight streamed through the classroom window, casting long shadows on the floor. At the back of the room, near the window, Victor Sanders sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the open notebook in front of him. He absent-mindedly tapped his pencil against the cover, a steady rhythm only he could hear. For Victor, it wasn't just a habit, it was a way to keep his thoughts clear amidst the chaos around him. The classroom buzzed with the usual pre-class chatter. Students grouped up, laughing and talking about their latest video games and favorite movies. But Victor stayed quiet, lost in his own world. He had learned to navigate through the noise without getting caught in it. Just being still and focused had become his way of surviving in this place. Next to him, Desi Cooper glanced over, noticing Victor's familiar tapping. With a quick nudge, Desi leaned in and whispered, "You know she never calls on you, right? It's like you're invisible to her." Victor just smiled faintly, giving a small shrug. He was used to it by now. Being overlooked wasn't new. Up at the front of the room, Amanda Brooks stood tall, her posture stiff and commanding. Her crisp blue blazer and perfectly styled hair made her look every bit the strict teacher she was known to be. For nearly 15 years, Amanda had built a reputation for being disciplined and firm. Students feared her, but they respected her too. At least most of them did. To Amanda, Victor was just another quiet kid in the background, one who didn't deserve much attention. She wasn't blatantly hostile. She didn't yell or insult him outright. Instead, her indifference spoke volumes. Whenever Victor raised his hand to answer a question, Amanda would scan the room and choose someone else. If by some rare chance he gave a correct answer, she would move on quickly, almost as if acknowledging his effort was beneath her. But if he got it wrong, which was rare, she would linger just long enough to make him feel small. It wasn't loud or obvious, but the message was clear. Victor wasn't worth her time. Across the room, Darius Brown leaned back in his seat, casting a mocking glance toward Victor. A smirk tugged at his lips as he watched the quiet boy mind his own business. Darius never missed a chance to make a snide comment, and today was no different. To him, Victor was just another easy target, someone too quiet to fight back. The bell rang, snapping everyone to attention. Amanda cleared her throat, straightening her notes before launching into her lecture about the Civil War. Her voice was sharp, precise, like every word was calculated to cut through any hint of distraction. As she paced the room, her gaze never once landed on Victor. He didn't expect it to. He had long since learned to live with the reality that, to her, he didn't really exist. Victor kept his head down, jotting notes, his mind wandering back to the evenings with his grandfather at the old piano in their small living room. He remembered the soothing sound of the keys, how they echoed through the house with warmth and love. His grandfather's hands were firm yet gentle, guiding Victor's fingers through scales and melodies. Music was his safe place, a space where judgment and harsh looks couldn't reach him. Somewhere deep down, Victor knew that one day his music would be the voice that spoke for him, louder and clearer than words ever could. And when that day came, he would make sure no one could ignore him. Victor sat quietly in the classroom, his eyes fixed on the open notebook in front of him. His hands moved almost unconsciously, tapping a steady rhythm against the cover with his old wooden pencil. It wasn't a sign of nervousness, just a habit that helped him think clearly, especially when his mind was swirling with thoughts. The class was buzzing with the usual chatter before the lesson officially began. Desi, sitting next to him, leaned over and whispered, "You sure you're okay, man? I still don't get why she called on you yesterday." Victor gave a small shrug, not wanting to dwell on it. "Guess she just wanted to catch me off guard." At the front of the room, Amanda Brooks was organizing her notes, her gaze sweeping across the classroom. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she straightened the edges of her lesson plan, looking every bit the strict, uncompromising teacher she always was. Finally, she looked up, her eyes settling on Victor for just a moment longer than usual. It wasn't the kind of look that signaled trouble, more like a challenge, an expectation. The lesson started with a discussion about the Civil War, specifically General Sherman's march to the sea. Amanda lectured with her usual sharp precision, but Victor could feel her gaze lingering on him more often than it usually did. Something wasn't right, and the tension seemed to thicken in the air. Then, in the middle of explaining the strategic impacts of the campaign, Amanda paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Victor," she called out, her voice crisp and commanding. Victor blinked, caught off guard. He wasn't used to hearing his name from her. "Tell us about General Sherman's strategy," Amanda continued. He sat up straighter, his mind racing through the information he'd studied. Taking a deep breath, he spoke calmly. General Sherman's march to the sea was a military campaign aimed at crippling the Confederacy's resources and morale by destroying supply lines and infrastructure. There was a brief, almost stunned silence. Amanda raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching with something that wasn't quite a smile. "Not bad," she muttered, barely acknowledging his correct answer. Desi shot him a look of disbelief, like he couldn't quite grasp what had just happened. Meanwhile, Darius snorted from the back of the room, clearly unimpressed. Victor remained quiet, not wanting to draw more attention than necessary. When the bell rang to signal the end of class, students began packing up, but Amanda's voice cut through the noise. "Victor, stay behind." A few heads turned in curiosity, but nobody said anything. Desi gave him a sympathetic glance as he headed out. Victor took his time gathering his things before approaching Amanda's desk. She was already there, arms crossed and a faint, almost mocking smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I overheard you talking the other day," she said without preamble. Victor frowned slightly. "About your grandfather. You said he was a musician." Victor hesitated, unsure of where this was going. "Yeah, he played jazz piano." Amanda's eyes glinted with something close to amusement. "Interesting. So, you must have picked up a thing or two." Victor hesitated, unsure how to respond. "A little," he admitted cautiously. Amanda's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good to know. Tomorrow I want you to play something for the class." Victor froze. The old dusty piano in the corner seemed to loom larger than life. "Why?" he managed to ask, his voice steady despite the surprise. Amanda just shrugged, her tone nonchalant but edged with something darker. "Why not? If your grandfather played, you should have some talent too. Let's see what you got." Victor recognized that tone, the same one she used when setting up a student to fail. She didn't think he could do it. She wanted him to embarrass himself, to confirm whatever low expectations she already had of him. Taking a deep breath, Victor just nodded. "All right," he said simply. Amanda's smirk widened, convinced she'd won. But as Victor walked out of the classroom, a quiet determination settled in his chest. Desi caught up with him outside, his face full of worry. You're really gonna do it. Victor looked ahead, his expression calm and unwavering. Yeah, I'm gonna play. He knew it wasn't just about proving Amanda wrong. It was about proving to himself that he could rise above the doubts, hers and his own. Victor knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow he wasn't just going to play, he was going to make them listen. The next morning, the air in the classroom was thick with anticipation. Word had spread fast. Victor Sanders was going to play the piano today. Students whispered to each other, casting curious glances at him as he walked in. Desi was already at his seat, looking more anxious than usual. You really gonna do this? Desi whispered, his voice low. Victor gave a slight nod, his expression calm. Yeah, it's time. From across the room, Darius leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face. Man, this is gonna be hilarious, he snickered, nudging the guy next to him. Victor ignored him, focusing instead on the old piano at the back of the room. It looked even more worn and dusty today, the yellowed keys catching the morning light through the window. His heartbeat was steady, and despite the tension, he felt a strange calm settle over him. The bell rang, and Amanda Brooks walked in, her usual confident stride echoing off the floor. She didn't waste any time. All right, before we start today's lesson, we're going to hear a performance from Victor, she announced, her tone both commanding and dismissive. A few students snickered, but most just stared, curious to see what would happen. Victor stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room on him. He walked to the piano, his footsteps sounding louder than usual on the polished floor. As he sat down, he wiped the dust from the keys with his sleeve, letting his fingers hover above them for a moment. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to those evenings with his grandfather. How his hands would move effortlessly over the keys, playing blues melodies that seemed to flow from his soul. Remembering that warmth and passion, Victor pressed down on the first chord. The sound filled the room, soft and soulful, each note pouring out like a confession. The melody carried hints of sadness, resolve, and a quiet strength that wrapped around everyone listening. His fingers danced across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his age, effortlessly weaving a story through music. Desi's jaw dropped, eyes wide with disbelief. Darius, who had been grinning just moments ago, was now sitting up straight, his face frozen in shock. Even Amanda's usual confident posture seemed to falter as she crossed her arms tighter, her expression unreadable. Victor didn't look at anyone. His focus was entirely on the music, on letting the keys speak for him, saying everything he never could with words. He pushed the melody higher, building to a crescendo that demanded attention, filling every corner of the room with a powerful, soulful sound. It wasn't just skill, it was heart, it was passion, it was every ounce of emotion he had stored up over the years. By the time he reached the final notes, the room had fallen into a stunned silence. The last chord hung in the air for a moment before fading away, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost sacred. Then unexpectedly, someone started clapping. It was Desi, standing up and applauding with a wide grin on his face. One by one, others joined in, until the entire class was on their feet, cheering and clapping like they had just witnessed a miracle. Darius looked around, clearly embarrassed, but couldn't bring himself to speak. Amanda remained rooted in place, her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowed as if trying to process what had just happened. Victor stood up from the piano, gave a small, polite nod, and walked back to his seat, his expression as calm as when he'd first walked in. Desi leaned over, his voice full of excitement. "Dude, that was insane. I didn't know you could do that." Victor shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. "There's a lot people don't know." As Amanda cleared her throat and tried to regain control of the class, it was clear to everyone that something had changed. The power dynamic had shifted, and the quiet kid who once sat in the back was no longer invisible. Victor didn't care about the applause or even the stunned look on Amanda's face. All that mattered was that he had played, really played, with every bit of his soul. The music had done the talking, and no one could ever doubt him again. The classroom was different now. The usual chatter had turned into whispered conversations, all centered around one thing: Victor's performance. It wasn't just a song he played. It was like he had unleashed something none of them had ever seen before. Amanda Brooks tried to maintain her usual composure, but it was obvious that she was rattled. Her voice seemed stiffer, her tone more forced as she resumed the lesson. But the students were only half listening, their minds still replaying the unexpected music that had filled the room just minutes earlier. Desi glanced over at Victor, eyes still wide with admiration. "Man, I knew you were cool, but that was something else," he whispered. Victor just gave a small, knowing smile, not really looking for praise. Deep down, he wasn't playing for the class or even for Amanda. He was playing for himself, for his own sense of worth that had been silently challenged for so long. Darius, who usually had something smart to say, was uncharacteristically quiet. He hadn't made a single joke since the performance ended. Instead, he sat with his arms crossed, his head down, like he was rethinking every rude comment he'd ever made. A part of him almost wanted to apologize, but pride kept his mouth shut. Class dragged on, but Amanda's voice felt hollow, like her authority had been shattered without her realizing it. Students were still whispering to each other, some glancing back at Victor with newfound respect. Desi couldn't help but chuckle softly, nudging Victor's arm. "Look at them. They're still trying to wrap their heads around it." Victor didn't respond, just kept his gaze forward, calm and collected. When the bell finally rang, everyone rushed out, eager to spread the word to other classes. Amanda hesitated, as if wanting to say something, but in the end, she remained silent. Desi waited for Victor by the door, his usual grin plastered on his face. "You really shook things up today," he said, giving Victor a playful shove. "Guess so," Victor replied, keeping his tone light. As they walked down the hall, Darius caught up to them. His expression was different, less cocky, almost regretful. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Hey, Victor." Victor turned, eyebrows raised slightly. "Yeah?" Darius looked down for a moment, like he was struggling to find the right words. "Look, man, I was wrong. About you. That was pretty incredible back there." Victor just nodded, offering a simple thanks. There was no grudge, no harsh words, just quiet acceptance. Darius seemed almost relieved, giving a quick nod before walking off, blending into the crowd of students. Desi smirked, impressed. "Never thought I'd see Darius actually apologize for something." Victor just shrugged. "People change when they have to." Later that day, as Victor walked home, the air felt lighter, clearer. He couldn't help but smile, not because of the applause or the looks of admiration, but because he knew he had finally made himself heard. Music had been his refuge, his voice, and now it had become his shield against the world's doubts. For the first time in a long while, Victor felt proud, not just for playing well, but for standing up for himself without needing to shout or fight. He had proven that talent and determination were louder than any mockery. At that moment, he knew he'd never go back to being the quiet, overlooked kid again. Amanda might never openly admit her mistake, but it didn't matter. The truth had been revealed through every note, every chord, and every beat of his heart. The afternoon sun hung low over Jefferson Middle School, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Victor walked slowly along the familiar path home, his steps lighter than usual. There was a new sense of freedom in his stride, a feeling that something important had changed. Just as he reached the school gate, Desi jogged up beside him, barely catching his breath but grinning from ear to ear. "Dude, you should have seen everyone's faces after you played. They're still talking about it," Desi laughed. Victor couldn't help but smile, a quiet satisfaction settling in. "Guess I surprised a few people," he said almost to himself. Desi nodded, his expression turning a bit more serious. "You didn't just surprise them. You changed the way they look at you. Even Darius looked like he was about to eat his own words." Victor shrugged, not letting the attention get to his head. "I didn't do it for them," he said simply. Desi raised an eyebrow. "Then why?" Victor paused, glancing at the sky, the colors blending into shades of orange and pink. "I did it for me, and maybe for my grandfather. I just wanted to play." As they walked along the quiet street, Amanda's voice suddenly echoed behind them. Both boys turned to see her approaching, her expression more thoughtful than usual. "Victor," she called out, her tone softer than it had ever been before. Victor stopped, waiting for her to catch up. Amanda hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I just wanted to say, you did well today, better than I expected." There was an awkward pause, as if admitting that much had cost her some pride. Victor met her gaze with calmness. "Thanks." Amanda shifted uncomfortably, her usual composure slightly fractured. "You surprised me," she admitted almost begrudgingly. Victor didn't gloat or rub it in. He just nodded, accepting her words without judgment. Amanda seemed to appreciate his restraint and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod before walking away. Desi couldn't hold back a chuckle. Did that really just happen? Did she just admit she was wrong? Victor just shrugged. Maybe, or maybe she just didn't expect me to be more than what she thought I was. By the time he got home, the scent of home-cooked food filled the air. Fried chicken and cornbread, his favorite. His mom glanced over from the stove, noticing the calm, contented look on his face. "You look happy today," she said, raising an eyebrow. Victor nodded, setting his bag down. "It was a good day." His mom smiled knowingly. "You want to talk about it?" Victor hesitated, then decided it was worth sharing. He sat down at the kitchen table and recounted the whole story, from Amanda's challenge to the stunned silence after his performance. His mother listened without interrupting, pride shining in her eyes. When he was done, she reached over and squeezed his hand. "I knew you had it in you," she whispered. Victor looked at her, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Grandpa would have been proud," he said softly. Later that night, as he sat by the window, watching the stars twinkle against the dark sky, Victor let himself replay the moment once more. The feel of the keys under his fingers, the music flowing through him like a river. He knew that he had proven something that day, not just to his classmates or Amanda, but to himself. He had faced the doubts and overcome them, using his talent as both a shield and a sword. It wasn't about showing off or proving others wrong. It was about being true to who he was. And in that quiet moment, Victor knew that no matter how the world judged him, his music would always speak louder than words. The days following Victor's performance felt different in the classroom. No longer did he have to endure mocking glances or sneering remarks from Darius or anyone else. Instead, every time he walked into the room, there was an undeniable respect in the air. Friends and classmates greeted him with nods of acknowledgement and even admiration. Amanda, despite maintaining her usual composed and disciplined demeanor, couldn't completely hide the shift in her attitude toward Victor. She called on him more often during lessons, giving him the chance to speak up and show his knowledge. Unlike before, there was no hint of condescension or disregard. Instead, there was something almost like encouragement, though she never admitted it aloud. Even Darius, who had been the loudest voice of doubt and ridicule, seemed changed. One afternoon, as Victor and Desi sat on the school steps during lunch, Darius approached them hesitantly. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable but determined to speak up. "Hey, Victor," he mumbled, eyes downcast. Victor glanced up, sensing the tension, but keeping calm. "Yeah." Darius hesitated, then finally looked up, his face reflecting genuine remorse. I was wrong about you. That was pretty awesome. I didn't know you could play like that." Victor offered a small, forgiving smile. "Thanks, it's cool." Desi grinned, giving Darius a light nudge. "See? Took you long enough to admit it." Darius just chuckled awkwardly before heading off, but his attitude had undeniably shifted. Victor knew that he had done more than just play a piece of music. He had shattered the misconceptions that had surrounded him for so long. He didn't need to brag or force anyone to acknowledge his worth. His talent had done the talking, proving that real ability couldn't be silenced by prejudice or underestimation. Even Amanda seemed to reflect on her actions. Though she never openly apologized, her demeanor softened, and she seemed more willing to give Victor the respect he deserved. It wasn't just about teaching history anymore. It was about learning a lesson herself, that talent and passion should never be dismissed based on preconceived judgments. As Victor walked home that afternoon, the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and amber. He felt a sense of peace, a kind of fulfillment that came not just from proving others wrong, but from staying true to himself. He knew he didn't play to impress or prove a point. He played because it was who he was, a musician at heart. Victor learned that day that talent speaks louder than words, and that when you stay true to your passion, the world eventually takes notice. He didn't need validation from others, but he found it anyway, because he had dared to be himself. And from that day forward, Victor walked with his head held a little higher, knowing that his music had changed more than just one opinion. It had changed the way people saw him, and perhaps even how they saw themselves. In life, we are often judged based on appearances or preconceived notions, but talent and passion are the most powerful voices to prove your worth. Never let criticism or prejudice hold you back. Stay confident and let your abilities shine. The best way to overcome doubt is to let your skills speak louder than words. When you stand firm in your passion and show the world what you're truly capable of, even the harshest critics will have no choice but to acknowledge your worth. Remember, your talent is your voice. Let it be heard.